Major breaking news out of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. A state court judge has declared that it is unconstitutional under the Second Amendment to indict and criminally charge a New Hampshire resident that had crossed the border into Massachusetts without a Massachusetts gun permit, according to the allegations. The judge said specifically there are no historical analogs that would justify the state of Massachusetts not recognizing a New Hampshire resident who is an American, after all, with Second Amendment rights, and the complaint was dismissed. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about this big decision in 1 second. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the 4 Box of Down Here, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, and author of First They Came for the Gun Owners. Check it out. It lays out the entire battle plan of the left to take our gun rights. Check it out if you want to know what they're doing. It lays it all out in detail in a single book in one place. All right, folks, major breaking Second Amendment news and good news. Believe it or not, out of Lowell, Massachusetts, that's right, Lowell District Court in Middlesex County, Massachusetts, in the case of Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Dean Donnell. Mr. Donnell, according to the allegations, is a New Hampshire resident in full legal compliance with all related gun laws in his home state of New Hampshire. Apparently, he crossed into the state of Massachusetts across the border. For those of you who do not know geography that well, New Hampshire borders Massachusetts. And I should let you know that if you're in that upper right-hand corner of the map of the United States, the states of Maine, Vermont, and Massachusetts are all contiguous, and they all are permitless carry states, by the way. They're actually very good gun states, but they're surrounded by New York and Massachusetts. So you have 3 very good gun states surrounded by bad gun states. Apparently, what happened here is Mr. Donnell somehow crossed the border from New Hampshire into Massachusetts and somehow was found with a gun. He did not have a Massachusetts permit, which meant he was in violation of the criminal statutes of the state of Massachusetts. Specifically, in a memorandum of decision on defendant's motion to dismiss, which I'll put a link to down below, the defendant, Dean Donnell, was charged in Lowell District Court with carrying a firearm without a license under a particular statute. Nevertheless, he filed a motion to dismiss the indictment and complaint on the grounds that it was unconstitutional for many reasons. The judge starts off by saying that the facts alleged for the purposes of this motion are not in dispute. Then he goes on to say that we all have to recognize that after Nyserpa versus Bruin, the Supreme Court has made it clear how to interpret the Second Amendment. He then goes on to say specifically that there is no historical basis for denying an American that crosses one border into another border for losing their constitutional rights. And this is a point we've talked about on this channel before, which is if I fly to California and I certainly have the right to go to a church, I have the right to go to a synagogue and practice. I have practice my religion. I have the right to protest. I can go to a BLM protest. I can petition the government for a grievance that I have with them. In other words, and if I'm stopped by a police officer in California, I have Fourth Amendment rights and Fifth Amendment rights. I get my Miranda warnings. The point is, my federal constitutional rights are respected in all states I go to. But somehow, when it comes to the Second Amendment, as of now, that is not the case. And this case seems to be saying that is obviously not right. Makes sense because I don't give up any of my other constitutional rights when I travel to another state. Why would I give up my Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, especially since the U.S. Supreme Court has repeatedly said it is a fundamental right on par with the right to life and other fundamental rights in our constitutional pantheon. After the judge analyzed the text and said, obviously, the right to carry firearms is a constitutional right in the text of the Constitution because the right to keep means to possess and the right to bear means to carry, he then goes on to say that, therefore, the burden shifts to the government, specifically the state of Massachusetts, to show that their historical analog laws that somehow justify this disparate treatment of non-residents, i.e., in this case, a New Hampshire resident that came into the state of Massachusetts, and now they've arrested him for carrying guns. This is what the judge wrote. The judge wrote that as a defendant in the instant case is not a resident of Massachusetts and is a resident of New Hampshire and is in full compliance with all New Hampshire's gun laws, the Commonwealth needs to show there's some historical analog relating to the disparate treatment of non-residents when it comes to Second Amendment rights. The judge takes on a series of arguments by the state of Massachusetts that tries to say, first of all, when there's all this Massachusetts law precedent. Nevertheless, the judge rightly says, hey, all that Massachusetts case law precedent all assumed that the right to carry a gun outside the home was a privilege. And he said that the Massachusetts court cases are clearly no longer the law of the land because the U.S. Supreme Court has said that the right to carry a gun outside the home is a fundamental right. So basically, all that Massachusetts legal precedent that's developed over many decades was thrown out by this judge on the grounds that, again, it wasn't thrown out by the judge, it was thrown out by the U.S. Supreme Court in Nysurper versus Bruin. He then goes on to say that there's simply no basis to conclude that an American citizen loses his Second Amendment rights when he crosses the border into the state of Massachusetts. This is how the judge concludes. He writes, a law-abiding resident of New Hampshire who is exercising his constitutional right should not become a felon by exercising that right while he's traveling through Massachusetts merely because he has not obtained a Massachusetts license to carry, which now, under the holding of Bruin, has to be issued to the applicant unless the applicant is otherwise disqualified. The standard for who is a disqualified individual must be the same. Otherwise, a state may decide to impose different requirements on the exercise of any constitutional right. For example, some states could impose different age limits or voting in elections. This court can think of no other constitutional right which a person loses simply by traveling beyond his home state's border into another state, continuing to exercise the right, and simultaneously becomes a felon subject to mandatory minimum sentence of incarceration. Anecdotally, a law-abiding New Hampshire resident exercising his constitutional right to carry while shopping at the Pheasant Tree Mall in Nashua, New Hampshire, would become a felon when he shops in a section of a store at that mall, which happens to be in the state of Massachusetts. An individual only loses his constitutional right if he commits an offense or has been engaged in certain behavior that is covered by 18 U.S.C. Section 922. He does not lose that right simply by traveling into an adjoining state whose statute mandate that residents of that state obtain a license prior to exercising the constitutional right to hold, otherwise would inexplicably treat the Second Amendment rights differently than all the other individually held rights. Powerful language by this judge. We should name the judge because it's such a good decision. It's Judge John Coffey, who is an associate justice out of the state of Massachusetts in Middlesex County. Again, Judge John Coffey clearly got this right. He thought this through carefully. Powerful language here. So again, a big victory for the Second Amendment and a big win for the Second Amendment defendant there who was criminally charged. It is absolutely absurd that you can carry a gun perfectly fine in the state of New Hampshire, and when you cross the border into the state of Massachusetts, you become a felon. It is about time that judges start to recognize this disparate treatment and start to step up and do something about it. And this could be the start of something big. All right, folks, hope you learned a little bit something here today at the Four Boxes Diner. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and we'll see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.